It's okay. I'm just at home in my office, no rush.
Bueno, buenas tardes a todas y a todos quienes nos miran. Hoy es viernes 14 de noviembre y estamos al un poco pasado el mediodía, hora de la Ciudad de México, y estamos en una sesión más de este seminario que, como ustedes saben, se titula Retos históricos y actuales del norte de México y del suroeste de los Estados Unidos, frontera, migración y economía. Y hoy tenemos el gusto de tener a la profesora Katherine Benton Cohen, o Katie Benton Cohen, que viene de la Universidad de Georgetown y nos va a hablar de su experiencia dando asesoría para la realización de esta película que se titula Bisbee'17 o Bisbee'17, en el cual pues ocurrió una deportación masiva de trabajadores que fueron expulsados del pueblo, de este pueblo minero hacia el desierto. Ella hablará más acerca del tema. Voy a permitirme presentar a la doctora Benton Cohen, de acuerdo con su currículum vitae resumido, que está en la página institucional de la Universidad de Georgetown. La doctora Benton Cohen es profesora de historia en la Universidad de Georgetown y bueno, hasta cuando se actualizó el CV resumido, su libro más reciente era Inventing the Immigration Problem, The Dillingham Commission and Its Legacy, inventando el problema de la migración, la Comisión Dillingham y su herencia, que fue publicado por la Universidad de Harvard en 2018. Además, la doctora Benton Cohen es autora de un libro que varios de nosotros que estudiamos el suroeste leemos en reiteradas ocasiones, que se llama Borderline Americans, Racial Division and Labor War in the Arizona Borderlands, que es estadounidenses de la línea fronteriza, división racial y guerra laboral en las tierras fronterizas de Arizona, que también fue editado por la Universidad de Harvard en 2009. Esta obra sirvió de base para su trabajo como asesora histórica del aclamado documental Bisbee'17, del cual vamos a hablar. Los intereses de la doctora Benton Cohen abarcan la historia del oeste americano, la raza y la migración, y las mujeres y el género en Estados Unidos. Actualmente trabaja en una historia global de la familia Phelps-Dodge, que eran empresarios mineros, cuyos vínculos capitalistas y filantrópicos entre Nueva York, la frontera entre Estados Unidos y México y el Medio Oriente transformaron profundamente cada región. Dr. Cohen, we're really, really happy to have you here. And, I cannot say how excited we are that you are actually here. So welcome, and I'll just give you the floor.
Thank you. It's really an honor and a privilege to be here. And I know I was bad at corresponding, and I'm glad we made it work. It's wonderful to hear from Mexican students and scholars. So I think what I want to do today, if you had a chance to watch the film, is I'll just talk for maybe 15 or 20 minutes about my career and my work and how it came to be that I was involved in Bisbee'17. And importantly, how my involvement in the film has shaped my subsequent scholarship, because it really led to my decision to write a book on the history of Phelps Dodge. And that was from the feedback that I got from the film. So I'll come back to that. I know that there are some students here, and I guess I've reached that stage of my career where I sort of talk about, I find that they often find it useful to hear about my, for lack of a less pretentious term, intellectual journey, and why I study what I do. So I will begin with some context that when I was younger, I actually didn't realize was as important to me as it is. As I've gotten further in my career, my family history has mattered to me more. I actually have foreign Anglo quite deep roots at the border. My grandfather was born in the Phelps Dodge smelter town and border town of Douglas, Arizona, across the border from Agua Prieta. He was born there in 1913, right after Arizona became a state, and his parents were Eastern European Jewish immigrants who opened a little store in downtown Douglas, where their customers would have been mostly Mexican immigrant smelter workers and people crossing the border to shop and so on. He then grew up in Nogales and El Paso. He graduated from Nogales High School in the early 1920s or the mid 1920s. His parents had a store. If you've ever been to Nogales, some of you, I don't know where you're all coming from. Some of you are in Mexico City, some are further north. His parents had a store only a few stores in from where the border crossing is now. Um, and I had the occasion to visit the Kino Border Initiative, which is a Jesuit and some sisters to advocacy organization and shelter in Nogales. And the US headquarters is next door to where my family's store was. Very, very moving to me. My mother was born and raised in El Paso, and they had a large extended family there. So I grew up in the Phoenix, Arizona area, but um, spent a lot of time growing up visiting my grandparents in El Paso, which I, by the way, thought was very boring. But now I really wish that I could ask my grandfather a lot of questions because he was a history major at UT El Paso, which was then the Texas College of Mines, and he had an incredible wealth of information. Um, so um, that is kind of the background that shapes my recurring interest in this area. So I went to when I was an undergraduate at Princeton University, we used to joke that the only thing that you could study there, you could study anything you wanted in the history department as long as it was on Amtrak's Northeast Corridor. You know, like if it was in Boston, New York, Philadelphia, New Jersey, you could study it. But the summer before my senior year, I thought, oh, can you study the American West? I didn't even know if you could, even though I was a native. And I thought, well, I'll just see if I can. And I was very lucky to work with a young assistant professor, Stephen Aaron, who went on to move to UCLA and be chair of the department there and now runs the Autry Museum for the American West. So as a 20-year-old, I lucked into a mentor who's become a very important mentor for my whole life, was past president of the Western History Association, and kind of mentored me to become a historian of the American West. So I went to graduate school at the University of Wisconsin, which was the home of Frederick Jackson Turner, of course. So it is a center for Western history, even if, you know, we mostly debunk Frederick Jackson Turner. And I was in the women's history program there. So Wisconsin had the first PhD in US women's history in the United States, PhD program. And I thought of myself as both a Western historian and a historian of women. And I was interested in finding a place where I could do both of those things simultaneously. So when I started my dissertation, which became my first book, Borderline Americans, I really saw it as an effort. I thought what I was doing was studying women from diverse backgrounds and what at the time was called intercultural relations. It feels so dated now, but it was basically how women of different ethnicities interacted with each other, right? Informed community or not. And I chose Southeastern Arizona because Bisbee, if you, this doesn't come through as well as it should in the film, and I can talk about that. Bisbee had over 3 dozen had workers and residents from over 3 dozen countries that worked in the mine. So it had this incredibly diverse population of Eastern Europeans, Northern Europeans, Southern Europeans, Mexican Americans, as well as, you know, ex-Confederates from the South, homesteaders. And then it had this also outside of town in the ranching areas, which really interested me, longstanding Hispano or Mexican American communities that had been there since the Mexican and in some cases the Spanish period. And I wanted to compare what those places looked like and how those folks interacted. When what happened is kind of a classic historian story, the documents, the archives kept pointing me to things about race more so than things about gender. And those are not separate as I've spent my career showing, but what I had gone in thinking was that, oh, there would be a woman from this background and a woman from this background, and they would interact. And what I found instead was that those boundary lines, who is Mexican, who is white, who counts as American, was very fluid in this time period. And not just in the way that we talk about borderland studies and fluidity, right? And hybridity and theoretically. I mean, actually, people fighting about things like Bisbee had a reputation as a white man's camp. Well, that only whites could work in good jobs, but who counted as white? Who could live in a white neighborhood? Were Italians white? Were elite land grant owning Hispanos white? And these were things that people were like actively debating. It wasn't a set in stone thing. It wasn't theoretical. And so that's where my work kind of went in that direction. And a lot of those things were also dependent on class, obviously. And I'm so glad your first visitor was David Montejano, whose book was incredibly influential to me. Anglos and Mexicans in the Making of Texas, like probably the most influential book for my dissertation. Um, but also gender, right? Ideas about masculinity that were tied to whiteness, and to mastery and hierarchy. So anyway, that turned into my dissertation, which turned into Borderline Americans, my first book. Um, I I don't know if any of you have heard of Bisbee, Arizona, or been there. It is a very beautiful little mountain town, and to be honest, I just wanted to go live there. You know, that was part of the reason I chose the topic. You should choose a topic where you like to go where the places are. And I lived there for 6 months in my 20s, and I had a blast. And grew up, finished the dissertation, got a job, got married, um, to someone who also likes Bisbee. And then I published my book. I really, really, really lucked out that my kind of niche micro study of a not very well-known area got published by Harvard. I want to just say that I'm like really grateful for that and didn't take it for granted at all. In fact, my husband called me from a funeral when he heard that I was going to study at Harvard. I mean, it's not something we took for granted. But at the time, the editor that I worked with, who's since retired, had been interested in growing an American West list. And one of my good friends had signed with them. And he said, "Oh, why don't you see?" So I want to tell you, like, these things, they don't just, I don't take them for granted. And it was kind of a circumstance that where I lucked out. And okay, so then I published that book, and I'm the rare person you'll see in the trajectory of my career who never got sick of their dissertation. I know people get sick of it, they never want to hear about the topic again. That was my first love, my first baby. I never have gotten tired of it. And so, but then published that book, and then I had been teaching in Louisiana, and then I got a job at Georgetown. And so I was moving to Washington, D.C. And whereas the research from my first book, and again, I'm telling you about kind of life stages and how they inform our work. When I was younger, I had a red pickup truck and I could just drive all over wherever I wanted and meet with people. And I was fearless. And, this was like at the height of the Border Patrol buildup in the late 1990s. And of course, I had a lot of white privilege feeling safe in that space. That was the big story going on where I was. But anyway, I was just out and about doing my business. I couldn't do that with it, living in Washington, D.C. And by then I had a small child. So I wanted to do a project that seemed like it had federal sources that would be easier to research because I'm really an archives person. Um, and so I had discovered this federal commission, which is the largest study of immigrants ever conducted in the United States. I had discovered one of their reports when I was researching my first book. They had done a report on copper mine workers in the Southwest, and I thought that their findings were very interesting and provocative. Um, One of the most amazing things is that I quote this in my first book, the Dillingham Commission, which eventually became the subject of my second book, their report about copper miners actually said, quote, only racial discrimination can explain the disparity in wages. At a time when everyone was falling all over themselves to say it was about skill or ambition or size or strength or length of time in the mines, these federal agents came out and said, no, it's just racism. Racism is the only reason why some people get paid more than other people. And I thought, huh, okay. And that was a great beginning to that project because the Dillingham Commission had a reputation among historians and sociologists as very racist, as the birth of eugenics in the United States. But here I began with a piece of data that suggested something else. So I wanted to investigate, is the story that we hear about this report correct? So not surprisingly, I concluded, because I'm a historian, that it's complicated. Um, but the implications of moving from a project that was very much about a region in the border, and the border didn't play a huge role in my first book, but it was a border region, to a second book that's really about the birth of modern federal immigration policy. What that meant, again, this was kind of stupid luck. I didn't plan this. It was my personal circumstances that determined it. But what happened is that I became one of the only scholars who has written intensively about a border place and border policy and federal immigration policy writ large. Not federal immigration policy focused on the border, but in particular, I argue that the Dillingham Commission's recommendations led to the quota system of the early 1920s, which you may or may not know, the quotas initially exempted Mexicans, so they've not been an important part of the story of Mexican American history until recently. But it did give me a perspective that I think other folks in immigration history didn't necessarily have. Um, a person I would say is kindred and better on policy than me is Deborah Kang. Deborah Kang at University of Virginia. I'm sure she'd love to come speak to you. She wrote a book about the INS and is now doing some stuff on federal policy. So she and I think, kind of have some commonality there. Um, okay, so that's the second. My first book is very social history, right? It was very much about ordinary people on the ground, miners, ranchers, farmers, hard scrabble folks. The second book is much more about elite policymakers, and in some cases, very elite people like Henry Cabot Lodge. And it is necessarily, but not desirably, about how elites thought about immigrants. And I don't love that. I think it's a good book, but it doesn't have you know, my heart isn't there, isn't with the protagonists. And I try to show some ways that that immigrants pushed back, but it's largely about policymakers. So I said 15 minutes, but I'm failing at that. Let me get to the movie. So in the midst, right when I had finished the draft of my second book, I had the opportunity to get involved in the film. And my involvement happened in a very funny way. So the backstory is that I had always wanted a film made about the Bisbee deportation. Since I'd been studying it in graduate school, I was like, this thing needs a movie. There's a novel about it that had been optioned twice for a feature film. Nothing came of it. I talked to filmmakers about it. And you all, in case, did anyone not watch the movie? Honestly, like, be honest, it's okay. Okay, so the Bisbee deportation is the strike in 1917, and they're Wobblies, and a lot of them are PLM related, and they get, rounded up on these company boxcars and shipped out. Okay, and I'm like, this is a story, folks, and I'm just a historian. So, but life got in the way, and I had another kid, and I was busy, but I would occasionally just Google the event and see if anything came up. And literally, I was in my office at Georgetown one day, probably procrastinating from grading, and I Googled it, and an online interview with the filmmaker came up who was talking about other films he made. And he said, hey, I'm thinking about making a movie about this place called Bisbee where this crazy thing happened. And I like almost fell out of my chair. And I was like shaking and so excited because he's also like a really interesting filmmaker. I was like, oh, this guy isn't some wingnut. This guy, he's Robert Greene is the in-house documentary filmmaker at the University of Missouri School of Journalism, which is one of the two best schools of journalism in the United States. I was like, oh my heavens. So I wrote him what I now call the crazy lady email. It's the equivalent of like being in like 16 point all caps font in like purple and italics. And I was like, I didn't actually do that, but I was like, I am a historian and I saw you're making this movie and can I help? And then I realized that I needed to sound legit. So then I sort of repped for things back. I was like, oh, right, I'm actually a little fancy. Like I'm a professor at Georgetown. I wrote this book with Harvard. I'm gonna like lean into not sounding like a crazy fanatic. Um, so I gave him a professional-ish email and he wrote me back right away. And he said, sure, I would love. And he hadn't discovered my book yet, which kind of hurt my feelings, but made me glad that I advocated for myself. And we began to work together. So the nature of my work for that movie was this. I had two undergraduate assistants who worked with our Center on Labor and the Working Poor at Georgetown. They were interns. And we went through all of my notes and archival materials for my first book. I had about a dozen boxes in my basement. This is a good story. Anybody who has a partner, my husband built bookshelves in the basement for these boxes of records. And he told me, you're never going to look at these again. And then one day I came home and I said, they're making a movie and they're using my boxes. So we went through all those boxes and we collected about 2 boxes worth. We were still giving them paper, partly because not everyone involved in the movie was very online. Wi-Fi is not great there. We wanted to give people physical pieces of paper that they could read. And we FedExed all these 2 boxes of primary source copies that we had, and some excerpts from my book, almost like packets of information. Um, and Robert asked me to create packets of information about 8 to 10 real characters, real people who were involved, and the same 8 to 10 scenes that really happened and the sources for them. So that was my role. And so I am really proud. Most of the scenes and people were, I mean, obviously some of them were very obvious. You're gonna have the scene of the deportation, but I did play a role in like what scenes exist in that film. And Robert's original idea, which only exists in a couple of the scenes in the final version, his original idea was to have local historians and local people reenact, as you saw, a few of the scenes and reenact them based on different sources or debate the sources afterwards. Okay. To show that we don't know how things always turn out, right? To show how subjective our analyses are. And an example of that that didn't make it into the final film, but I'll tell you about. There was an incident where Mexican American members of the Wobblies went to a commercial industrial laundry where women worked, Anglo and Mexican American women. And they tried to organize the women. And Sheriff Wheeler freaked out, right? He really saw there was the sexual menace of the Mexican men with these Anglo women trying to pressure them into joining the Wobblies. And this white sheriff could not, that was making his head explode. And a group of 3 young women, we went to a laundromat and they reenacted the scene. And there was another historian and then we had a conversation on film about what we thought was right about the scene or the sources. And I'm really glad it didn't make it into the final cut. One, because I don't want to see myself on a big screen. And two, because I found the conversation very uncomfortable. The other historian that I was talking to is a very tall man. He was kind of physically intimidating, quite a bit older than me, and wrong. um, and the dynamic was really awkward because I really thought his interpretation was wrong. But I also have a more elite position. He teaches at a community college nearby, but he had more presence because he was an older man. And the dynamic was very strange and uncomfortable. And we were standing like in a laundromat arguing. There was a young film editor, an undergraduate woman who was one of the editors for the film. And she told me that she loved the scene. She and the women who had played the laundry workers loved the scene, and that she kept it till the very last edit. And I thought that was very interesting that these younger women liked the scene. They liked to see that, but I was very uncomfortable about it. Um, but I share that story because this is real people with real opinions, but also it shows you like what was behind the scenes of how they were thinking about the film. So I also was in Bisbee for the week that a lot of the filming, the week that was the actual centennial of the deportation in July. So July 12th, 2017. And I stayed with a friend and I was an extra. And then I had that part that was cut. Okay, so I'll wrap this up because I know people always have a lot of questions about the film. Fast forward, the movie comes out at Sundance, it gets rave reviews. I went to about 12. I loved it. I'm so bored of Ken Burns. I loved how messy it was. To me, it's like how real history gets made, like seeing the sausage be made, right? And I went to about a dozen premieres or screenings around the country to do Q&A and stuff like that. And so many people in the audience had so many questions. And on the East Coast, excuse me, on the East Coast in particular, there were a lot of people who knew about the Dodges or knew them and didn't know about their relationship to this copper mining company. And then on the flip side, there were all kinds of people when we did it in the West, when we did screenings in Arizona, who of course were Phelps Dodge employees or just, family members of employees, and they didn't know anything about the wealthy Dodge family in New York City. And so I thought, you know what? I want to write a book about them. And so I decided to turn back to that material, and I can answer more questions about that if you want. I'll just say two things. One, so my family moved back to Bisbee and we lived there from January to June of 2024 last year. My older son is in college, but my younger son went to third grade at Greenway Elementary, the school that has the beautiful floors. Third grade. That's where he went to third grade last year. And it does have beautiful floors. And it's next to the tailings pile, as you probably saw in the film. And what was the other thing I was going to say? And my current iteration of the book is that I am looking at 3 Phelps Dodge Company towns and how they can tell us a history of capitalism. One of them is Bisbee. One is Clifton Morenci, which was known as a Mexican camp and is the largest mine in North America to this day, and a pure, true company town. And the third is a crazy place called Playas, New Mexico, that was a smelter town that was only open for 20 years. It's in the boot heel of New Mexico. It was built for the workers for a smelter that was built in the 70s, the Hidalgo smelter. And then they closed the smelter. They closed the town and they sold it to a university that uses it as a training ground for special operations and border patrol after 9/11. They built 6 fake Afghan villages in it where special forces train. They bill it National Guard and Border Patrol in old company houses, but then some of the other ones are just abandoned. They use them for like practicing shooting and stuff, and it is really, really weird. So the book is about those 3 places. So I will stop and you can ask me questions about the film because I think questions are really important to this, to understanding this. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much for all your sharing all this experience that you had with the film, Dr. Cohen. And then we will proceed to this section where we have questions and answers. No sé si quieren hacer preguntas, pueden hacerlas en inglés, las pueden hacer en español y traduzco yo o la profesora, no sé si comprende el español, pero tal vez sí comprende.
Un poquito, so you can translate.
Ok, ok, bueno, le voy a dar la palabra a Judith Fragoso. Ok, Judith.
Hello, thank you so much for the space. I will try to make my own questions in English, but if anything gets kind of confusing, please let me know. First of all, I would like to say that I really like the film. I was not expecting that blend between documentary and more artistic views of the of the deportation of Bisbee. I actually never heard before about the city nor from the deportation that happened. It was really bad. And I would like to say also that um, uh, we as a group had a little chat about that, and we also view some of videos in YouTube about the history of what happened. And most of us didn't know about um, the what happened. Well, my question is that as a historian, were there challenges into turning such a difficult history into a film based on that the historical aspects might have been compromised for the sake of the image, not only from the city and the country into a film, but also from a speech? Because I remember that in the film they said maybe I'm getting kind of mixed into the film and what the videos we saw on YouTube. They say that they achieved to keep the town silenced about what happened, at least for some time. So maybe they liked the idea that of forgetting, of trying to deny what happened. So when a historian comes in and say the facts that actually happened, it can be difficult for the people that live there.
That's a really good question. And here Robert, the director, and I really want to credit the people of Bisbee. So the way this starts, so first of all, Robert learned about it because his mother-in-law has a house in Bisbee. And so he had gone there and he was like, what's this crazy thing that happened? The way that he initially approached the movie prior to me being involved is that he heard about this committee, local committee of historians and civic leaders who wanted to figure out how to do a centennial, how to celebrate is not the right word, remember at the 100th anniversary. So they're that group right there in a conference room and they're arguing. You see them a couple of times. Robert wanted to follow this story of like, how do they deal with this really, really difficult issue? And I want to give credit to that group of local citizens because they were the ones that started this process. It wasn't because Robert did it. Robert was following the lead of the committee of local people. And that's really important. What Robert was able to bring was obviously publicity and the opportunity for them to make it bigger, to think about what thoughtful reinterpretation and the reenactments might look like as a process for thinking about the past, not just for fun or whatever. And I'm going to say some things that feel almost nostalgic in the 2025 Trump era. You can see that this is a town that has people of a wide variety of politics. It's way more liberal than lots of parts of Arizona, but it's also rural Arizona. This is the county that was infamous in 2020. It wouldn't verify its county election results because of conservatives who didn't believe the election results. This is a place that has a lot of really conservative people and some Bisbee radicals. But the town really agreed to this as a group. I mean, it really did. The town's police chief agreed to shut down the road to do the reenactment, which, if you think about it, is amazing. Amazing that the local police department shut down that road for the filming of this. The families, as you can see in the film, some are very conservative, but everyone agrees that this is an important event in Bisbee's past that they want to try to deal with. So I happen to, when I screened it at Georgetown, the former governor of Arizona, Bruce Babbitt, who was then Secretary of the Interior in the US. He's a big deal. He ran for president in 1988. Bruce Babbitt came to the viewing and he told me that he saw it like a truth and reconciliation program, which is something that a lot of cities in the South are doing around civil rights, where they have these intense listening sessions and discussions to talk about the past. And in some ways, that's kind of what Bisbee was trying to do, is to tell the truth and to reconcile over what happened. And I organized a panel at the Western History Association 2 years later that had some of the local historians on it who concurred that they feel like real progress was made, that people are talking about these things more openly. The film has been shown many, many, many times in Bisbee. Anyone who wants to see it has seen it. And so I know it sounds hard to sound positive about anything, but this is something that I think was really successful in town, and people made a real effort to think about it. And the last thing I'll say is Lori, the artist Lori, who does the pencil rubbings of the coins and is in the film, she's a good friend of mine. Some of the people that were involved I've known for like 25 years, and some people I met through the filming, and Lori is one of them. And Lori runs an art co-op that I actually had an office in last year. I was like the visiting scholar. And Lori showed me this review of the film. Most of the reviews of the film are really, really positive. She had a review from a very snooty, very elite art journal, where it described someone in the film as very as Trumpy, or like a Trump follower. And maybe that's true and maybe it's not, but it wasn't explicit in the film. And even though Lori is herself pretty radical and anarchist, we were both very annoyed by that, because we were like, that's not part of the film. Like, we're not talking about those politics here, right? It's not useful to put a label or a stereotype on somebody who's meeting you in good faith to talk about this thing in the past. So, yeah, I don't know if we could have done it in 2025, but that's that. Thank you. It's a really good question.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Cohen. ¿Hay alguna otra pregunta? Aquí la pueden hacer en español, yo traduzco, o bien la pueden hacer en inglés. No sé si hay otra pregunta. En lo que se deciden, vamos a leer un comentario. We will read a comment that we have on
Oh,
Facebook.
thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, we have a comment from Valentina Tovar, who wrote this. I think it's really complex to offer a script that it is well done to the relation about labor relations in the United States, a country that is really proud to have a democratic spirit, but that also has a long history of suppressing workers when they become really rebel, and of brutalizing and relocating and incarcerating people, especially Native Americans, of Asian origin or Japanese origin, and also U.S. people from Mexican origin that have been considered enemies from the dominant class. And my question to the speaker is, how was it, or how did you feel to write this documentary movie, considering your work as a historian? Was it hard? Was it easy?
I've been dealing with this material for a really long time, so that part was okay. Reenacting it was pretty intense, right? When you can, I think Robert does a good job in the film of showing when the men are actually loading people onto those cars, they get kind of emotional afterwards, right? That the man who says it feels wrong in this day and age, this feels wrong. One of the things that Robert has talked about, so I'll borrow from what I've seen Robert tell viewers when we did screenings. When he was filming the reenactment of the deportation itself in the ballpark and then the roundup into the cars, he did not tell people to be violent because most of the evidence suggests there was very little violence, which is actually creepy. If you look at the pictures, it's very orderly, which is scarier than if it was chaotic. That's actually something my husband pointed out to me looking at the pictures years and years ago. He's like, these are really orderly, which is weird. But people got really riled up in the reenactment, right? You saw them yelling and shouting and all of that. Robert didn't ask them to do that. One of the people playing one of the deputies is a Episcopalian priest turned high school history teacher. And he was one of the ones who got really into the acting, was like being really aggressive and swearing and pushing people. And it was a little scary to see that people would do that when they had the opportunity, even though they were just acting. So that's the first thing I say. The second thing I'll say is that I went to the premiere in Scottsdale in the Phoenix area. And I took as my date a friend from high school who is a prominent immigration and defense attorney in Phoenix now. Wealthy, white, tall, old WASP stock, but his clients are mostly Mexican immigrants. And he was really freaked out by the film. And he said, this is what they want to do again. And he said, and not just immigrants, but the people that support them. He's like I'm next. And I thought he was being ridiculous. It was 2018. I thought he was exaggerating, even though this is what I study. But he's not wrong. I mean, now we have the presidential orders about immigration attorneys, about due process. We've ended refugee status. Now I think back and I was like, he was right. He was right. He's like, it's not just going to be immigrants. It's going to be people who support them too. I mean, so that freaks me out now in retrospect. I feel like I was not freaked out when we did it. And now I'm like, I don't know if I can watch it right now. And I'm sorry, I'm sure it was quite upsetting for some of you to watch. It's a lot. It's a lot.
Well,
Yeah,
there's a lot to say about
it's a lot.
it, right? ¿Hay alguna otra pregunta de los que están aquí? Otra vez la pueden hacer en español y yo traduzco. If not, I have a couple of questions and then probably someone else will ask. Well, a ver, Alexis. I'll let Alexis go first and then I'll ask my questions.
Perdón, bueno, no me animo a hacerlo en inglés, pero si me ayuda a traducir, se lo agradecería mucho. A mí me interesa mucho el rol de la prensa bueno, en el acontecimiento como tal y como lo tratan en la película.
No, más despacio. He says he's really interested about the role of the press, of the reading press.
Entonces, mi pregunta va dirigida a que la película se enfoca mucho en la prensa local, en el Bisbee Daily Review. Quería preguntarle si sabe algo sobre la reacción de la prensa local, pero del lado mexicano, y un poco más sobre la prensa nacional en Estados Unidos.
Okay.
I think you got that, right?
So what were the distinctions of the way it was depicted in the different presses?
Well, he says that it seems that in the movie they actually focus more on the American side of the press. And what do you think if you think it can be researched something about the Mexican side of the press
That's a
how it
great
was
question.
used?
Okay.
And the national press in the US also.
Yeah, that part I got. Local versus national. I didn't know if you said Mexico or New Mexico when I was following that, because New Mexico covered it too, because the men ended up in New Mexico. So there's also coverage in New Mexico newspapers. I actually don't know the answer to the Mexico question. I'm sure that would be a great thing to research. Some of you should do it right now while I'm talking. See if you can find anything in Mexican newspapers. I'll try to answer this succinctly, quickly. One, you know that this is where the PLM, the Megonistas, the Megon brothers lived in Douglas in 1907 when there was another Phelps Dodge strike. So there's a lot of awareness around there. Douglas had a Spanish language newspaper for a while. Bisbee did not. I would love to see what Mexican newspapers said about it. That would be great. I don't know the answer. Woo-wee, the press thing is very interesting. It was front page story in the New York Times. I mean, in a way that, again, now I haven't talked about the film in a while, and it's hitting me hard, right, in late 2025. The headline was about an Arizona County sheriff rounding up people. I mean, how it started, how it's going. And that was in the paper the very next day. The local papers, there was tons of coverage, and there was one wonderful newspaper called the Arizona Labor Journal. Then an old silver miner had started, who was a landowner in Cochise County. So he had a lot of interest in that region. Oh my gosh. He covered the heck out of this and all of the trials. You know, there was a civil trial and there was a criminal kidnapping trial. No one was ever held accountable. He covered all of that. He used that really intense early 20th century newspaper guy kind of language, really strong language. So there was a press that was very against the deportation. Phelps Dodge owned most of the major newspapers in Arizona. It owned the Tucson Daily Star. It owned the Bisbee Daily Review. It owned the Douglas Dispatch. It owned a paper in Phoenix. It owned papers in New Mexico. I found in the first week that I was living in Bisbee last year, I mean, I go there all the time, but the first week that were living there last year, I went into an antique shop and there was a picture of Cleveland Dodge Jr. So he's the generation after the deportation. And it was his credentials for the Associated Press, because here he was, this multi-millionaire New York corporate official, but he had credentials as an Associated Press correspondent because he owned papers in Arizona that covered his companies. I mean, it's crazy. So that's national versus local. There was an opposition press. But the last thing I want to say is that one of the things that happened is that on the morning of the deportation on July 12th, someone at Phelps Dodge told the Western Union Telegram office and the AT&T, the phone company, to shut down and would not let anyone make outside phone calls or telegrams. And that included the Associated Press's telegram wire. Their reporters were not allowed to report out the story. But here's what's interesting. I discovered at the Huntington Library in Los Angeles, there are papers of a man who was hired in the 50s to write a history of Phelps Dodge by the company. The company hired him to write an official history. He has copies of telegrams between the New York office and the Bisbee office. You guys are getting advance word. This is in my book, but it has never been published before. I haven't published anything about it. New York wrote to Bisbee and said, we're hearing stories that you shut down the telegraph wires for the press. They're like, this is a federal, you didn't really do that, did you? New York was opposed to that because New York knew that was very, very illegal, right? Like, and freedom of the press was like, even in the era of, lack of civil liberties in World War I, Phelps Dodge's New York office was very, very concerned that the Associated Press wire service had been shut down. And they were like, you didn't really mean to do that, did you? ? You better get that up and running. So I think there was a lot of internal controversy about how it was handled.
Well, thank you.
I'll say one more thing. Also, Cleveland Dodge, who was the highest level family member in the company, he was on the board of directors of Western Union. So I think he did not want to get sideways with them. He also, I can't remember, I don't think this is in the movie. Walter Douglas, sorry, not Walter Douglas. I'm sorry, I'm being so confusing. Cleveland Dodge went to Princeton with Woodrow Wilson. They were college classmates. He was Woodrow Wilson's #1 campaign contributor for re-election. And so Wilson was in a very awkward position when the deportation happened. He ordered this federal investigation, but it was also the company of his biggest contributor. So that was a very awkward, like after Wilson left office, Cleveland Dodge gave him a Rolls Royce. That's the kind of friends they were. I have a letter from Wilson to Dodge saying, Mrs. Roosevelt and I are loving our new vehicle. He also lent him his yacht one summer when he needed a little vacation from the White House. So that's the kind of relationship that they had.
Oh, wow. That subject actually has a lot of it has a lot to do with the question that I was thinking of making, but let me see. Diego has a question. Diego.
Hi, I tried to make my question in English like you did. So first, I'm sorry for my English. I
No,
think so very bad. I think so very bad. So I think I believe that meaning strikes are the precursor of movements in Mexico. Um, Particularly in Coahuila, there was a Cananea case. No, sorry, it's in Sonora, I think.
Cananea,
Um,
C6. Uh-huh.
Yeah, in Coahuila we had a case, the Nueva Rosita case. I think it's a case like mm, in a mine. So I don't know what the case. So in Talaverna, bueno, creo que ya me confundí. Se me puede ayudar a traducir, doctor David. Intenté, hice lo mejor que pude. Bueno, quisiera como que exponer un caso también de
Solo
en
di unas
Zacatecas.
oraciones y luego yo traduzco y luego otra vez lo retomamos. Sí.
Sí, el caso de Salaverna también me parece como que en Zacatecas, que a raíz de estas explotaciones mineras como que el pueblo fue evacuado, fue reubicado, entonces creo que también me parece como que puntual compararlo con el caso de Bisbee, que es como que una memoria colectiva que ha estado como que compartiéndose y ha ido como que despojando a quienes desarrollaron un sentido de pertenencia en sus tierras. No sé, creo que podría equipararse ahí un poco con el caso de Bisbee.
Okay, so
Y
Diego also wants to highlight the case of Salaverna in Zacatecas, where the town was actually displaced by the mining company, and he wants to highlight how these big companies displace workers who were who already had a tradition of being there, and he was also speaking about the case of Nueva Rosita, which Coahuila. We're in Coahuila. Coahuila has a coal mining zone in the
Ah,
northern part. Uh-huh.
uh-huh.
Okay. Diego.
Do you
sí, sorry. A mí me gustó mucho el documental, bueno, el filme. Creo que es algo muy interesante que podemos aportar los historiadores a tipo de algunos cuestiones como estas, más allá de alejarnos de la academia, de como que estas investigaciones densas y rigurosas que pudieran como que llegar a, a, no sé, a abrumar a quienes los leen o a quienes tratamos de llegar. Creo que yo le preguntaría a usted en este caso, ¿cómo podríamos comenzar a estudiar estos casos puntuales? Quizá de huelgas, quizá de movimientos obreros de este lado mexicano, alejados de precisamente estas investigaciones rigurosas y académicas, no sé, como que llegar a un público más accesible que se interese por preservar la historia de estos movimientos obreros o mineros en este caso. Esa sería mi pregunta.
Okay.
Did you get all that, Debbie?
Did you get that?
No, that was
Okay.
fast for me.
No, well, he says he really enjoyed the film and that it
Okay.
was a really good film, and that he thinks that it is great that people in academia actually get involved in projects like this that,
Thank you.
exhibit the memory of these populations and these people who were involved in social movements. And he was asking, the last part was a question um, about what are your recommendations for those people or those people in academia in Mexico who want to study strikes like this that actually also occurred in the Mexican side, if you had a recommendation
Oh,
to make about it.
well, you should do it. Uh, but I think because how do I say this? There's a new generation of historians of the border who are truly bilingual. Not new, but I mean, and I think it's terrible that I don't have better Spanish, and it's actually interesting that my grandfather was totally fluent because he really grew up in the world in which the border, there was no wall, there was no fence, there was just, my mother in El Paso grew up knowing a pretty good amount of Spanish. And then, to be fair, I didn't realize that I was going to write on a border region until rather late in my process, but obviously I should have learned Spanish better. The people who can be bilingual, I think, have the opportunity, I am answering this question, to look at this in a truly binational way. There are some scholars who do that, but I think one of the things about studying labor at the border is that it's not one side, right? You have to study both sides because they're very influenced by binational political movements, whether it's the PLM or the Wobblies, international labor movements, anarchism, anarcho-syndicalism, labor leaders who go back and forth between the two areas, ways that, so like Zacatecas, silver mining or zinc mining learns from gold mining, learns from copper miners, right? Those are all different unions, actually. So sure, I absolutely think that people should study it. I know that archives can be difficult. You have to be creative with your archives. This is why I would really encourage you to invite Kelly Lytle Hernandez, because when she wrote her history of the Border Patrol, she basically found an archive that had never been used in Mexico and saved it from being destroyed. She has now written a book on the PLM, on the Magones, that won the Bancroft Prize, which is the biggest US history prize. So she's doing that kind of work. Yes, I don't know what else to say, except you absolutely should do it. I guess I'll add, in terms of my new research, I want to say, I would add to this, Diego, the 1915 strike in Clifton, Morenci, Arizona. People have written about it, but it's not as well known as Bisbee. And as much as I love
I'm actually writing an article about that.
You are?
Yeah.
It's so interesting. We should talk later because I have sources on it. I have the telegrams I was telling you about, but the ones for 1915 from Phelps Dodge.
Yeah.
That strike is run by Mexican workers. They run American managers out of town. The American managers leave town on the company railroad. It's like a reverse deportation. And the governor of Arizona supports the Mexican workers. That's the strike that should be more famous than the
And then the Western Federation of Miners abandons the Mexican workers. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
It is
sorry for interrupting. Sorry.
No, but I'm gonna have a chapter on it and try to argue. I mean, Clifton Morenci is absolutely fascinating, and it has always been led by Mexican origin workers. In '83 too. Yeah.
Okay. ¿Más preguntas? If not, I have two questions.
Okay.
They actually have to do a lot with what we were just saying. One of them is, what do you think about this relationship between, capital and the state, and the supposed this
Oh, question.
this possibility of workers? It seems that it transcends times. I mean, it happened then, it happened later, it is happening now. And the other question was about actually these strikes that they sprouted uh, all over the Southwest, or the copper border borderlands, the copper borderlands, which we had strikes in Cananea, we had strikes in Clifton Morenci, we had strikes in Bisbee, and what ties all of these the strikes. And lastly, this is I'm actually cheating here because there will be a conflict of interest in these questions, and you will notice it right away. But what do you think Mexican historians can say about all this phenomena, all these processes, all these social movements that happened in the U.S., but that and that involved Mexican workers, but quite often are not analyzed by Mexican historians. They are analyzed from the U.S. side, but not from the Mexican side. Not that much, and that's
Yeah. Well, the first thing is that I don't think I should tell Mexican historians what to do. I'm sure that American historians have a lot to learn from Mexican historians, but I do think, so I'm going to answer these in reverse order. I'll come to your giant question second. The more that I've gotten into this project, the more I have thought about how all of this is connected, even though I knew that intellectually with my first book. But there's something about the nature of the source. I have new sources now, so let me say something about that for the students. I told you I'm really into archives. Like, I'm the person that likes to go to the archives. A collection I didn't use in the I have access to stuff that no one has used before. So one is the collection by the company historian that's at the Bancroft Library, where anybody can look at it. I'm sorry, at the Huntington Library, but nobody has until me. And these sources are unbelievable. And David, I'll share some with you later. I also there was another historian who was hired by the company in the 1990s to write a corporate history. I'll show it to you. So he wrote this book, big, heavy book, and was paid by the company. And then this is the book that the guy, Cleland, whose papers are at the Huntington, wrote in the early 1950s. Nice copper font, Knopf. He was a classmate at Princeton of Cleveland E. Dodge, class of 1909. There's a connection there. So Carlos is retired now. And I thought, oh, I'm not going to have any relationship with this guy because he was hired by the company. Yuck. But I wrote to him, and he actually has been incredibly generous. And he said, I have 22 boxes of documents and tape recordings of interviews that Phelps Dodge never asked for me back. They fired the person who had hired him, left the business and left the company. And he said, my wife wants these out of my basement. You can have all of them. And it is full of incredible stuff. And it started me seeing the way that the company saw all of these as connected. Okay. And the company, of course, as you know, was in Mexico, and they had a lot of ties to Cananea, which some people have written about. I think that US historians should pay a lot more attention to Mexican workers and their organizing in the United States. I think it's still seen as regional, but I think it really has national implications. Like I said, I'm from Arizona, which has such a reputation for being conservative. Once you put Mexican workers at the center, it's not conservative at all. At all. I mean, Phelps Dodge workers went on strike every 3 years in the 20th century, basically. Okay, so there's that. I think that the one thing I guess I would say is that Mexican historians should think, just like US historians should, of the region of what, in this case, the geographer Meinig called the copper borderlands, that we should ignore the border because capitalists certainly did, right? And think about that as one unit. The second thing, the relationship between capital and the state. Hold on 1 second. Sorry, my husband's leaving town. I was just saying goodbye to him before he left. Okay. Capital in the state. You want me to answer briefly what the relationship is between capitalism and the state and whether it has changed over time? Am I understanding your question correctly?
No, no, no. Well, it was more in the direction that of all these critiques that the anarchists, like the Magon brothers, they were always saying that, you know, capital was tied to the state and to the church. And you know, for me, it is really surprising to see the sheriff actually, you know, working for the company and shipping these workers there, because I have seen that in other places. I mean, when there were many movements, for example, in Southern California, where there were local people who didn't want, for example, Chinese workers, or they didn't want Mexican workers, and they always had the sheriff doing the dirty work, you
Or
know?
repatriation.
Yeah.
Okay, well, a couple thoughts on that. I've written about this. Actually, my very first article I ever published looked at the racial aspects of the deportation. And one of the things that I find so fascinating about this event, why I haven't gotten tired of it after 30 years, is that I actually think Harry Wheeler is a very complicated figure. Harry Wheeler sided with strikers. I don't want to say that, but he was very neutral in earlier strikes, including in Clifton Morenci in 1903, 1904, when he was the head of the Arizona Rangers. Something flipped in his head in 17. He was actually elected as a working man's candidate. He was not known before 17 as being in the pocket of mining companies. I think what happened to Wheeler is that he really, really believed that opposing a war industry was treason. And he was racist. But like he really, I don't think he did it for the money. I've been reading, I don't think he thought of himself as acting in the interest of capitalists. I think he thought of himself as acting in the interests of the United States in wartime. And for him, that was also philosophical, that he saw the Wobblies were radical. They were opposed to the war. They were opposed to capitalism. I mean, I don't have sympathy with him leading the roundup. I have sympathy that Wheeler was in a no-win position in 1917. He was, in fact, the sheriff of a border county during the Mexican Revolution. The Battle of Naco had crossed into the US side, right? Agua Prieta was a center of political organizing in the revolution. He knew this strike was happening, which was not, he was afraid. It wasn't violent. The strike wasn't violent, but he was afraid. You know, it's a town that has like one way in and one way out. And, you know, he asked for federal troops several times. He sent telegrams to Wilson before they shut down the wires. I think he was frightened, and I think that their interest coincided with his desire for law and order. Do you know what I mean? And that's, I think, often what happens when the state sides with capital. Some of them are, I mean, I don't want to say, like, lots of people, it's just money, 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 right? I mean, look at our federal government right now. Having said that, what I always think of, there's something about property crime that really freaks people out. Like in Washington, D.C. in 2020 in Black Lives Matter, which seems like a million years ago, there was minor looting, like at some of, department stores and stuff near where I live. Minor property crime. I'm not endorsing property crime. I don't think that people should break store windows and take stuff out of it. I also don't think it rises to the level of criminality as police officers murdering people, right? But there is something about disorder that really freaks a lot of people out, right? The amount of attention that was spent on looting. There's something, this is not me as a historian, this is just me as an American citizen, that really freaks some people out. There's something about how people define disorder that they really can't deal with. That's just my own observation.
Okay, well, thank you. No sé si hay más preguntas, Omar. No. Okay. A ver, Judith.
You have an Alexa and an Elisa. My middle name is, you have an Alexis and Elisa. My middle name is Alexa, so I like
Okay.
that.
It's not actually a question. I just wanted to point something out. And I think it was that I wanted to say at first, but I kind of forgot. I think it was a really good choice to blend disciplines like history and arts to bring this story to the people, and I think it was very well made. I think I remember you saying that some people said that it was kind of confusing the way it was, the way the movie was laid out, like kind of mixing documentary and then interviews and then the film part. But I actually really like that because when you look back into historical movies, like I don't know, what can you say? It's a historical movie like 1977. Or how is it called? I don't really remember. Maybe the pianists. I don't know. Like they are based on true events, like
Mhm.
saying that. It gets really blurred the reality that happened and the actual facts
Right.
into the image they want to project or into the speech that we were saying earlier, and putting side to side the archives, like you say, and then the artistic part for people to understand better. For me, it was really, really good, and I think it is something that should be done more. I think it's an amazing tool for historians to approach people, to get people to know what actually happened, and in such a little time, like 2 hours, we get to know a full history.
Thank
That's
you.
what I wanted to say.
I have to credit Robert for that, but I feel like it's a dream come true that such an interesting filmmaker wanted to make this film, because Bisbee is so weird and its past is so complicated and it needed a weird, complicated story. I think when I said I'm so bored of like the Ken Burns kind of classic documentary, part of that is that I don't really believe in the historian as the authority with all the facts. Now, believe me, I believe there's things that are true and not true, and I want evidence. But it feels like when you see one of those documentaries with all of those men with gray hair, telling you what happened, you almost can't ask questions. It's like God is telling you or something. Well, you can ask God questions too, but it's like there's no room for debate. But that's not what history is really like. That's hiding how we actually do history. So for me, it feels much more authentic to what history is. One other thing I'll say about it is that, you know, Bisbee has some really good local historians. The guy who does the voiceover in the beginning, he has the radio show. Charles, he grew up there. He's a great historian. He's a good writer. He's a great historian. He went off and had a career at universities, not as a historian, as a theater manager, and moved back to Bisbee. And it makes me humble. I have a big title. I have a fancy job. I have a research budget, but they are doing really good historical work. And I agree, like the artist thing, Lori's installation with the copper pennies with all those names does more than a book could do. The number of those, and I went to that installation and it took your breath away. It's just walls of these copper pennies and you see all their last names. One thing the film, there's two critiques I have of the film, and I don't, you can only do so many things in 2 hours, but two things that are important to me and my work that don't come through in the film is the ethnic diversity of the participants, right? You see it with all their Slavic last names and stuff like that. And when they read the names in the church, that's beautiful. But that ethnic diversity kind of isn't as present in the film as it could be, nor is the role of women. Did you come across the film about women? There's a short film that Robert Greene made that's about the women in the deportation, where there's a woman, a local woman, named Annie Larkin, who reads the testimony of women who were witnesses. That got cut from the film, but Robert made a short film and it's really, really good. And we talked about it. And Robert said, yeah, those two things didn't really happen in the film. He said, because ultimately, he said, I thought the film was partly about masculinity and I wanted to focus on that. And I was like, no, I understand that. But you can't do everything. But yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for your answer. ¿Hay más preguntas, comentarios? No? Sí? Well, I have to say that we really appreciate having you here. And with that, I personally have learned a lot from your experience with this kind of media that, you know, historians often do not take into consideration unless they are called for advisory or
Right.
you know, assessment. But I really learned a lot, and I actually think that the students actually learned a lot too, as you can see from their questions. And we really enjoyed our conversation with you. You're a really nice person
Thank you.
to speak to.
I love talking about Bisbee and this film. It's such a joy to me. It's such a joy that this film exists and that I get to talk about it. So thank you.
And I am really happy, you know, that we have these conversations with Mexican historians and U.S. historians and students and, you know, U.S. historians, and they can see how you guys work, what difficulties you guys encounter with projects like this or in your own research. And believe me, we learn a lot from this.
Well, and I would just say that it isn't often that the U.S. needs Mexico's solidarity as much as we do now. This is a very, very terrible time for historians in the United States. Our archives were shut down for 40 days. They're taking apart the Smithsonian. There's speech laws that people can't teach things in states. I mean, these are very dark times for US historians. I will say my university has been really wonderful so far, but we are hurting. We are being targeted. To me, it's not funny, but there's something really ironic about us trying. No one thought we were important until suddenly someone noticed that we said things that certain people don't like, and then suddenly historians are, you know, targeted. So thank you for listening.
Well, we really appreciate you sharing these thoughts and with us. And you know, I hope you don't have a problem if the students want to send you an email or asking you questions.
Oh no, please. I'm curious to see what people have to say.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. With this conversation and with these final thoughts, you know, really interesting final thoughts by Dr. Katie Benton Cohen, we end this conversation. Omar, no sé si quieres terminar la transmisión, and we can stay here a little.